Hi.
Hi, Stacy.
Hi, how are you?
Great. We'll let people pop on and then introduce you and ourselves and get this show on the road.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you again for having me.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for being on with us. I know, hold on, we're going to make sure everybody's muted, except you, obviously. All right. We're going to get started to respect your time. So I'm Ashley. I'm one of the leaders, founders, I don't know what we call ourselves, of the Creepy Book Club, and Emily Reader is on. So we started Creepy Book Club together.
Awesome.
And we're so excited to have you. A lot of us have read Flicker in the Dark, and then obviously we all just finished this book and it blew our mind. It's the first
thank you.
that like we usually have books that are like 2, 4, 5, and this one people were like 5 or 4 or 5, and it was the first one that really I feel like we came together on to be like, this is the book.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much.
And I know you just finished a big tour, right? You just did a big tour with this book, so you're probably very tired.
Yeah, but it's January's crazy because it came out January 10th. And so pretty much the whole month of January I was traveling around. And then I've had little events here and there, or like festivals that I'm going to, but I've had a little more time to hang out at home and work now that we're in a new month. So it's not too bad.
Awesome. I know when we reached out to you about doing this, I thought, oh, it's right on the heels of a big tour. So thank you for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, of course.
We will just jump right in. And the first question we all wanted to know, because this book is just, it encompasses so much and it is incredible, is what was your inspiration for this book?
Yeah. Before I get started, I am going to warn you, my husband's going to get home in about 10 minutes and my dog is going to go berserk. So you're probably going to hear him. I'm just warning you, this happens every time I'm on a virtual event. But yeah, so the inspiration behind the book, there was a couple different things that worked together to have this all come together in the way that it did. I will say the first little seed of inspiration came in 2019, which was funny enough before I had even finished A Flicker in the Dark. So I was not even looking for a second book. I didn't even have an agent for my first book. So I wasn't like actively seeking out a new book idea, but I read an article in the Washington Post that followed around a man at a true crime conference. But it was really interesting to me because he wasn't there as an attendee. He was there because his sister had been murdered in the 80s in a string of unsolved murders called the Colonial Parkway murders. And in 2019, it was going on like 35 years of being unsolved. So this man was in his like 50s, I think, 50s, 60s, and he had basically dedicated the last 30 plus years of his life to trying to find justice for his sister and figure out what happened to her. And that included going to conferences and getting up on stage and kind of schmoozing with the fans and trying to network with the podcasters. And I had never really thought about the true crime craze from that perspective before. I feel like most people who consume true crime do have an understanding of the murky morality behind it. And we kind of struggle with like, how is it ethical to consume this and what should I be consuming? But I had never really thought of the person on the other side of it has to embed themselves in that community because they know it'll further their case. But there's also a lot of like really exploitative feelings that come along with that. So that was the initial little seed of inspiration. And then another one came about 6 months later when I had a bit of an unsettling experience with my husband talking in his sleep, which I can go into more detail about that if you want. But it was a weird moment that led to the whole sleepwalking leg of the book.
Absolutely, yes. Everyone's like,
okay.
Yeah, you can't just tell us that. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so basically, I would not consider myself an insomniac, but I'm a while to fall asleep. Like I'm one of those people that like my brain never shuts off. So I'm just kind of laying in bed, overthinking everything. And my husband is the exact opposite of me. He falls asleep in like a second and he sleeps so deeply. And sometimes he starts to talk. And so normally it's pretty benign. Like he's just kind of mumbling about work or just saying random words. But this one night I'm laying in bed and my mind is racing about something or other. at this point, I kind of had the idea of all the dangerous things in my head. Just this loose, like a woman at a true crime conference trying to find her son, but I didn't know much more about it than that. But my husband like sits up in bed and his eyes are wide open and he turns on the bedside lamp and he's just staring straight ahead. And I was like, what are you doing? Why'd you turn on the light? And he turns to look at me and says, she needs to see where she's going, like with his eyes wide open. And so I was like, see where she's going. Like, what are you talking about? So I'm like shaking him awake and he finally wakes up and he doesn't remember any of it. Like he has no memory of doing that or saying that or turning on the light. Yeah. And so naturally he falls back asleep in like 2 seconds and I'm horrified, like more awake than ever in bed next to him. And I started thinking about how walking, first of all, like this mental image of this woman walking around in the dark who needs to see where she's going got me thinking of a woman sleepwalking. And then I started thinking about how insomnia and sleepwalking are basically opposites of each other. They're both sleep disorders, but one deals with sleeping so deeply that you're kind of losing control of your body. The other deals with not being able to sleep, so you're losing control of your mind. And I thought it would be interesting to create one character who suffered from both and try to unpack which would be kind of more terrifying.
That's amazing. One story. People are like, we don't want to hear your story, Ashley. But my dad used to sleep talk a lot. And one night he woke up and said to my mom, there's someone in our house. And she looked at him like, there's someone in our house, and he didn't remember it, but it's amazing what
Yeah.
while sleep talking, and you're the person next to him like, hey, I need more information.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. And I was trying to put myself in both, for me, for the person witnessing the sleep talker, it's really creepy. But then I was trying to think like, how would it be to be the sleep talker? Like waking up the next morning and seeing things moved in your house and you don't know if you moved them or if someone else was there and moved them, or kind of waking up and someone you love is looking at you with this weird, look on their face and you don't know why. I mean, there's so many things about it that I just weird. And it's more common than you would think.
Thank you. So a lot of the members of our group are parents, a lot of moms and some dads. And we were fascinated at the end to learn that you were not a mother. And we're wondering what kind of research you did, because you just wrote it. So, I mean, we felt this book in our core as parents.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And is this a spoiler chat? Should I preface with spoilers?
You've read it, you say whatever you want, and we'll make sure to say it's a spoiler chat. Absolutely.
Yeah, so spoilers coming. But yeah, I'm not a mom. I'm kind of around the age. I'm 32, so a lot of my friends are parents, and they around the time I started writing this book, I had been seeing them kind of go down the journey, and myself included, of trying to decide: do we want kids? Do we not want kids? Is it one and done? Do we want 5? Am I going to go back to work? I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. And I felt like it's a very personal decision, and everyone approaches it, in their own way. But no matter what decision any of them made, in the eyes of society, it was wrong. Like everyone always had an opinion about what they were choosing to do, and they were never afraid to vocalize that opinion. And that just really bothered me, because I just felt like, okay, you can't do it. You can't do it right. Like there's no way you can do right in the eyes of everyone else in the world. So that was a big reason why I wanted to write about motherhood, was just to kind of shine a light on, if there's this woman in a situation where something really terrible happens to her son and she's kind of thrust under the world's microscope, what would it feel like to have everyone kind of pointing at her and saying, what a bad mom, and then if you absorb all that blame enough, it becomes really easy to then believe it yourself. So that was what I wanted to show with Isabel, was the police not trusting her, her neighbors and friends not fully trusting her, the comments on all those articles not trusting her, and then when she absorbs all of that blame, she then starts to not trust herself. So I talked to a lot of, all my friends that are moms. I talked to my mom quite a bit about what it was like when I was apparently I was a pretty colicky baby. And so she had a lot of stories about me just kind of like screaming nonstop and the frustration when she couldn't get me to quiet down and she was doing everything right, but it didn't matter. And then of course I did a lot of research on Andrea Yates, because that's a horrible story. And part of the message I wanted to get across with this book was the importance of maternal mental health and not brushing it under the rug. And I wanted to make sure that in that reveal, I was making that was a tricky reveal because it's a climax part of the book, and it's scary and it's horrifying, but I didn't want Isabel to be afraid of her mother. I wanted her to be afraid of what had happened, so I wanted to make sure I really understood that case and everything about that condition, and to make sure I was coming at it from a place of empathy.
Yeah. And the timing of when we were reading this book with the case that's currently happening in Boston I know some people in our group were like, I kind of almost put the book down for a second because we weren't sure where it was going to go with that. Just feeling like, oh, wow. So talking about Isabel's mother in the book and then other characters like Ben, we could talk more about him. Which character did you find the most difficult to write?
Ooh, man. I would say Isabel's mother was a hard one to write because I wanted the reader to have a feeling throughout the whole book that there was something a little not right about her, but I didn't want them to fully know what. And then I kind of wanted the reader to look at her through childlike eyes. Like Isabel saw her mom doing things that were a little odd, but she was so young, she didn't know what it was. And so I kind of wanted the reader to feel that way too. And then mentioning with the reveals, I didn't want to villainize her at all. I wanted it to be like kind of heartbreaking what happened. And so I wanted to make sure I was inserting these little clues of her like asking for help and trying to kind of do the right thing, but then clearly struggling too. And you couldn't really understand why. So that was a tough balance trying to get her right. I mean, I think I did, I hope I did, but that was, she definitely was the one I rewrote the most times.
Absolutely. I think in that we've had a couple Zoom discussions about the book before tonight. And that was one of the things we talked a lot about was that we just were so sad for her. No one was really, angry, but just feeling like this woman needed so much support that she didn't get. So I think you nailed it with that character.
Thank you.
Feel that emotion for her, just sadness and grief for what she went through.
Yeah. And it's mental health and maternal mental health is something that is, it needs to be talked about more. But I think especially back, this book was set 30 years ago in the South in a prestigious family. So I kind of wanted to also shine a light on like it was something that was looked at as, we just don't talk about that, and thankfully I think it's gotten a lot better since then, but there's always room for improvement.
One of the things with Isabel's character was the amount of time it took for her to have the conversation with her parents about what had happened to her sister. And one of the discussions we had was a piece of that she was worried that they would potentially confirm what she thought had happened.
Yeah, I think so. It's another thing with a theme of the book is kind of about all the different ways that people deal with grief. Like there's Isabel's way, and then there's Ben's way, which we later learn more about Ben. But and I kind of talking about how you can different ways to deal with it, and no way is really the right way. And when people grieve in different ways, it can also it can pull them together or it can drive them apart. And Isabel comes from a family where they just don't talk about their problems. Like if something bad happens, they just kind of sweep it under the rug. They don't talk about it. They're not honest about it. And so I think there's a few things. One is she didn't grow up in an open household where she could talk about things that were on her mind or questions that she had. It just wasn't something it's just not how she was raised. And so I think when you don't ever really grow out of that. I mean, if that's how it was in your family, it's really hard to break out of that and become a more open and honest person. But two, yes, I think she is afraid that they're going to confirm what happened because she's always had this like lingering that, Margaret was scared. Margaret said, like, it scares me when you do that. And she was sleepwalking around and she would wander in her room and, she saw the footprints in her wet nightgown, like the clues were there. So she kind of pieced them together and formed her own conclusion. And she was just horrified. She didn't want to know if she was right, like she wanted to be told she was wrong, but she also didn't want to know that she was right. So she just kind of tried to ignore it.
Yeah. And then it felt like that same thing carried into watching the footage of herself in Mason's room.
Mm-hmm.
Same feeling I know we all had of what is she gonna find out? Do we even want her to go down this path? What is she gonna see? I mean, the way that you wrote that, we all just felt like we were in the room watching it with her, thinking, what is she gonna find?
Thank you. Yeah. And it's really, her son going missing that I think kind of kickstarts her realizing that she has to figure out what happened to Margaret, because if she did it again and it happened to Mason, like that's kind of her standing on the cliff edge being like, okay, I've got to know, like I have to figure this out.
This is kind of a bigger question, but were there parts of the book that you just knew when you started to write it, like this is going to happen, this is going to happen? And then were there parts that came to you as you were writing it that you decided to include?
Yeah. So the way I write is I always know kind of like, I pretty much know what the big idea of the story is, and I know what the twist is going to be because I need to know what I'm working towards. And the twist to me is what makes it exciting. But I don't know anything in the middle. So I make up everything as I go until I get to the end. And then inevitably those little like micro twists come to me as I'm writing. So oddly enough, Waylon, this is another spoiler. Waylon being Valerie's brother was not pre-planned. That just kind of slipped into place very organically. Because for the longest time I knew like there's something about Waylon. There's got to be a reason why he's like digging so deep. But it wasn't until I was maybe halfway through when I was just like, oh, that's it. And then of course you have to go back and edit stuff and pre-place clues. So that came to me as I was going. And then how I wanted to handle Ben, I always knew that Ben was a bad person. And I always knew he was gonna kind of get framed in the end and kind of get his for being such a shitty husband. But I didn't know how deliberately I wanted him to be, or I guess how directly I wanted him to be involved in Allison's death, her suicide. So I kind of went back and forth on like literally having him like drug her food and kill her, or just having him be like that incessant nudge to like get her to act on her own bad thoughts. And in the end I think he's kind of like that puppet master of a person where he's able to push people into doing the things that he wants them to do without actually doing it himself. And I think that was the right move, but it took me a while to figure that out.
I'm glad you said Ben was bad because we all agree with you.
He's the worst. Yeah, he's the worst.
I guess one of the bigger conversations we had too was the swiftness with which he wanted to move on and wanted Isabel to move on within less than a year of Mason missing. But that was because he had information knowing that really Mason's okay. And once you find that out, he's still an asshole, but
yeah, he is. He's in the beginning, and it goes back to that thing of grief and how people deal with it in different ways. I'm going to bring up my husband again. He's a wonderful guy, I swear, but like we deal with things very differently. I am kind of an overanalyzer, and I, if there's a problem, like I obsess over it, I research it, I pick at it, and he is very much in the camp of like, if it's out of my control, there's nothing I can do about it. Like all you can do, he's logical. He kind of moves forward. And so that's kind of how I wanted to frame their relationship. Like, what if two people dealt with things in two completely different ways? Like you can't really fault him if that's just his way of handling grief. But of course it comes out later that there's much more to it than that. But yeah, I was a little worried when I was writing it, how people would feel about me framing a innocent guy, but most readers have said like, that guy's not innocent and he deserved it. So
we loved it. It was we'll talk about the ending. We were like, if he wasn't going to die, that's the second best option, is to be in jail forever. One of the things we definitely had a chat about on our talk too was the man on the porch. And if that
Yeah.
was something you knew you were going to write, or if that came to you. And we were kind of looking at the bigger implications too of just them choosing not to come forward with information for personal reasons, how it would impact their own lives, and then just kind of how a neighborhood works and just those pieces of it.
Yeah, you're actually the first person to ever ask me about him, the man on the porch. And I kind of have another funny story about that. That man is inspired by a man in my neighborhood who when I have writer's block or like a plot hole I can't really work out, I always take my dog for a walk, and we walk, a couple miles around my neighborhood, and there's so many little things in my neighborhood that have made it into my books because they'll just trigger ideas. And there was this man who lived in his house a couple blocks from me, and every single time I walked my dog, doesn't matter what day, doesn't matter what time, he was always sitting outside in a rocking chair with his robe on, and he was always just kind of walking and would always just kind of wave at each other. And I kind of, was wondering, like, what is his story? Like, why is he always out there? Why is he always in his robe? Like, is he out there in the middle of the night too? And, can I be walking around at 3 a.m. and would he be out there? And so that's kind of how I thought of him. And he was put in there because I needed someone to see Isabel walking around and kind of give her that confirmation that, like, oh my gosh, I was outside, I was holding my son. Like, she's seeing herself sleepwalking in his nursery, but having someone say, I saw you outside with your son, is something completely different, So I needed that. But then, of course, I also needed him to be a kind of an unreliable witness because it's not actually Isabel, That was how I came up with him. And yeah, he does tie into the whole, doing things for selfish reasons. Like, they could have come forward and solved this thing a year before, but they knew it would lead to their own, problems within their own family. And I imagine that's probably normal in a neighborhood. I mean, yeah, they didn't want to inadvertently kind of put themselves in the eyes of the police if they didn't have to.
That's surprising that more people haven't asked you about him. We talked so much about that. We talked
really
so much about that. Well, because at first we were some people were saying they were going to feel frustrated if it was like a paranormal, like something she had just seen, or like ghost or whatever. Like, please let it be a real person. The way you wrote it, she's such an unreliable narrator. She doesn't trust herself. Nobody trusts her, that we didn't know if it was a real person. So we were thankful. And then it's such a consequential person. Without him, we don't solve this.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I would never. I like playing with the idea of writing psychological thrillers, playing with characters who can't really trust themselves, but that would seem like a cop out if this guy was just like a ghost on the porch.
When it comes to the ending, also, did you know that's how you wanted it to end? It sounds like you did. And the way you wrote it, most of us reading the hardback copy had to go back because the transition was so quick. All of a sudden, someone was walking into a jail, and we thought, is Isabel there? And then we figure it out. So anyway, just talk about the ending and how that came together, because we all gasped and reread the chapter.
Yeah. So I wanted to write that chapter in a way where in the very beginning, you might think Izzy's the one in jail. Because she's in this jail cell, and you're kind of thinking like, okay, clearly she, we see her kill someone, we see her kill Valerie, and did she get caught? And then I wanted to slowly realize, like, oh, like, she's not in jail, Ben's in jail, and this is how it happened. So yeah, I guess my biggest thing with the ending, I knew how I was going to end it for the most part, but I wanted to make sure that Mason was okay. I was never going to do anything bad to Mason. There's no way. And I wanted to make sure that everything Izzy had been doing for the last year paid off. So the fact that she kind of this because she went to that true crime con, she saw that woman in the front row, like that picture was taken, it ended up online. Like, she just spent the last year, like, chasing these dead ends and doing everything that she could possibly do to find her son, and everyone kind of telling her, like, stop, give it a rest, like, leave it to the police. But she actually solved it, and so that's that's what was important to me, was to make sure, Mason was okay. Everything Izzy did was for a reason. And the responsible parties, it's a happy ending when it comes to thrillers, I think.
Absolutely. And it kind of felt to us like the detective who had been kind of crummy and not trusting her or really following some of her instincts that she was providing to him, or ideas, kind of gave her a wink and a nod. Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I did, some people have told me like, is that really realistic that the cop would just do that, like a wink and a nod? But I also do feel like when it comes to, like a mother's love for her child, I think a lot of people would understand, like, you're going to do everything in your power to find them. You know what I mean? And a lot of people have said that too about when she attacks that grocery store clerk. Like, on the one hand, that can be fun as this unhinged behavior, but on the other hand, a lot of mothers have been like, yeah, I would do it. Like, you just never know, if you're looking for your son and you think there's someone right in front of you that did something to him, who knows what you would do.
That was definitely feedback we all got, that Isabel's character was very relatable to parents, saying like, there's no way I wouldn't go to the ends of the earth until I find out what happens, even if it's unsettling information.
Yeah.
Have you had people reach out to you? Just a couple more questions and then we'll let you go. But
yeah, no problem.
Reach out to you who unfortunately have been in this situation and ask you any questions or given you feedback about the book?
I thankfully have not heard from anyone who's had like a missing child. I've not heard anything like that. Thank God, because that would be horrible. I have heard from quite a few people who have dealt with postpartum anxiety and depression. And again, thank God, they have all responded very, very positively, which was the most important thing for me. I was, I mentioned in, I don't know if you read the author's note, but I mentioned in the author's note, I was kind of afraid to write this book because I know what my intentions were, but you never really know how they're going to come across, And so yeah, I've heard from a lot of women who were thankful for, or grateful, I guess, for raising awareness on something like that. And I tried really hard to handle it delicately because I know it's a sensitive subject. So yeah, thankfully most of the feedback I've gotten has been positive when it comes to that.
Absolutely. I know I've spoken with a lot of women who are part of the group who have experienced postpartum varying levels, who just felt connected to what you wrote, and that it was just done very respectfully and honestly. And yeah, well, we have one question left. And then we want to let you go, but we always like to ask our authors who come on, what is a book you think doesn't get enough hype that we have to read? You can say Flicker in the Dark, but that got
okay, I'm lucky enough in this job to read a lot of ARCs to provide like the blurbs on the cover. And the very first early book that I was sent when I started doing this for my job was a book called The Lost Kings by Tyrell Johnson. And it's got, the New York Times wrote up a little blurb about it. So it's clearly gotten some attention, but I don't really see it around the way I thought I would. So if you guys have not heard of that, definitely check that book out. It's fantastic. The writing is so well done. And I don't know, I think I expected that to just like kind of blow up and be everywhere. And it's not, it hasn't been as big as I expected it to be. So The Lost Kings by Tyrell Johnson is another psychological thriller, and it's really, really well written. I think I read it in like a day.
Perfect. Emily put it in the notes for everybody. Thank you. And we humbly request that you now write a prequel all about Ben, because we want to know how it became so terrible. And we need more Waylon. So if you choose to write that, our book club will read it immediately.
Oh, good. Yeah, I love Waylon. He unexpectedly turned into one of my favorite characters, I think. Yeah, and Margaret, she was my favorite to write. I think she was just a little sweetie. I liked her.
Well, thank you so much for giving us your time tonight.
Yeah,
congratulations. It's an outstanding book. We
thank you. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you reading and asking such thoughtful questions, and all your support online. I see it and it means the world.
Thank you.
All right, thanks guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.